An energy shock is rippling through India. Restaurants are shutting down, auto rickshaws are going off the road, and LPG shortages are beginning to hit small businesses and housing. All of this is unfolding in the wake of an escalating war in West Asia. There is a lot of information flying thick and fast. Reports of LPG shortages and their cascading effects on the service industry, small businesses, and consumers are beginning to trigger a sense of panic. Alarm bells are ringing, but what is actually happening on the ground in India? Carbon Copy has spent this past week investigating the ripple effects of this war across India's metro cities and how quickly things are beginning to change. After assuring the public that India was in a very comfortable position when it came to crude availability, the government has now invoked the Essential Commodities Act to regulate production and ensure the supply and distribution of natural gas for priority sectors. And add another twist to the tale. US President Donald Trump has just announced a $300 billion oil refinery project in Texas involving Reliance Industries. He has called it a historic deal. For India, developments like this raise important questions. On the one hand, the country is grappling with an immediate energy shock triggered by the West Asia. On the other, Indian companies still appear to be playing a significant role in the global oil economy. To help us make sense of these fast-moving developments, we are joined today by M. Rajshekhar, Archana Chaudhary, Shashwata Kundu Chaudhary, and Paridhi Chaudhary, who will help us unpack what's happening and what we can expect in the days ahead. Welcome all. Rajshekhar, Shashwata, and Paridhi, I wanted to start with you because you guys are tracking the situation on the ground. In our conversations before this podcast, Shekhar, you spoke about, you described this energy shock as akin to the demonetization shock that India experienced a few years ago. And the impact was felt really quickly, a couple of days after the war began. So clearly we've been caught unawares. And so I wanted to understand how dire is the situation on ground?
That's a hard question to answer. We do not know what is the actual shortage vis-a-vis how much is panic buying right now. Okay. Shashwata and I were talking about his trip to industrial clusters in Calcutta. And people there were telling him that they are surprised that within a week of the war starting on Iran, we're already seeing shortages. It's logical to assume that tankers were already dispatched tankers before the conflict would still be on their way to India. Refineries in India would have their stocks. We should not be facing a shortage so quickly.
Right.
So one scenario is where you have the equivalent of a bank run when people suddenly lose confidence in their bank and want to withdraw all their money. I think some of that is playing out where everyone with an empty cylinder is suddenly putting load on the system. And therefore, the LPG shortage is hard to accurately pin down in terms of is there a supply-demand mismatch as of this moment. Longer term, definitely. But as of this moment, hard to say. With industry, we know that there is a shortage because the government has redirected supplies from commercial users to domestic users. And there you are seeing what are, I think, the first order effects. The first order effects are where firms are suddenly saying that, I have either run out of my LPG cylinders or I'm going to run out of them in 2 days or 3 days or something. Most of the news has been focusing on eateries. But if you go to industrial clusters, you will hear similar sounds from them. You're starting to see early sounds of people talking about alternative fuels or saying that, at some point we'll have to close operations for some time. This is the first stage. When I was moving around in an industrial area called Malur, just outside Bangalore, firms using electricity were also saying that, the second order effects will fall on us because some of our inputs, whether it is LPG for cutting steel or it is oil for making paint, those shortages are going to come in. At which point, even firms running on electricity are going to find that their assembly lines are starting to stop. But this is a second order effect. I mean, this is kind of like demonetization, where all of a sudden India had removed 76% of currency from the economy. And the shocks then were felt not only across the country, but they varied according to location and they varied according to time. because currency came back in, but it was very unevenly distributed. People figured out markets were affected differently for different durations of time, all of that. You will have something similar here. You will have gas cylinders being unevenly distributed across the country. You will have an energy shortage, which is unevenly distributed across the country. You will have people falling back on replacement fuels, fuel oil, furnace oil, methanol, whatever. And so there will be a spike in prices of those as well, which means that the third order set of effects. You have already a lot of people saying that if we don't get cylinder, we'll use firewood. And that is frightening because you're talking about accelerated deforestation, right? So at this time, this is heavily in flux. I think we should just track it week on week and see how this thing evolves right now.
One thing that I've been noticing is the eateries that Shekhar said. There's been a lot of focus on eateries, but there in second order effects, the supply chains are also getting affected. Like in Kolkata, the sweet shops, they run on basically like a cylinder a day roughly, and they get their daily supply, but that has been disrupted. So they can only run their shops for just a day or two more days. But if they cannot if they do not get gas, they will have to stop orders for milk and sugar and other raw materials which come in, which have very short shelf life. So especially for milk, that is going to get disrupted very badly because the milk supplier has to bring the milk, even if it is not being sold. So there is going to be huge wastages. And even in terms of employment, if the gas crisis hits in the next few days and there is absolute shortage, then a lot of people will be migrating out of Kolkata and back to their homes in the nearby villages. So there we can possibly see like a mass out migration. So, and one of the sweet shop sellers that I spoke to, he even described that this situation has the potential of becoming something which happened during the first lockdown, when things were not available and people had to gradually shut shop because nothing was functioning.
I talked to few industrial associations, and most of them noticed that this trend of them like manufacturing being disrupted. In Delhi and Jaipur, I talked to few of them, and they talked about how plastic manufacturing is being disrupted the most. Most of the industrial association told me that they have stopped the production and some have stopped taking in more orders. In Jaipur, the situation was that most of the industries have stopped taking in orders and then are trying to fulfill the ones that they already had, because at this point they are very uncertain, and the manufacturers from whom they source their raw material have stopped responding to them, and they are largely relying on what they have right now. They don't know how long will that last. In Delhi, in Bhavana industrial area, the president of the association told me that how, like earlier, the factories that used to run all day long are now like not even running for even 12 hours. How they, like earlier, they were told to shift from diesel to natural gases, and they did get natural gas connection. But now Indraprasth Gas Limited even put out an advisory that they're not sure like how long this gas will last, and these industries need to look out for another fuel, an alternative. And this impact on eateries is always there, and mostly like food chains like Bikaner Wala and Gopala across the city, they still have like Gopala sweet shop in Delhi. They told me how they have enough fuel to run for a month, but and in Bikaner Wala, what I heard was how they are going to shift to electric cooking, and corporate is sending out all these materials to them, but they won't be running on gas for so long. But local eateries, like local food shops and food markets that are there, that are being impacted in a way, like they said, we don't know how long, even in hourly basis, they can run. And they are very cautious in taking in the orders, what they can cook, because they don't have enough fuel to even run for a day. That is the situation here in Delhi.
Yes, Shikhar.
So this is what I meant, right? So I was talking to plastic manufacturers in Malur, and those guys say that there is no impact on their raw material supply, even though plastics are again made from uh, uh, petroleum, right? Uh, and that's what I meant, that the effects are going to be very, very localized in how they're playing out. This firm, however, had a raw material inventory for only 3 days because they were so confident that raw materials would be available that they didn't feel the need to have a deeper inventory than this, which is the same thing that Paridhi is also saying in a slightly different context, where firms using diesel were encouraged to shift to gas, saying that gas will be cheaper, it will be extremely stable in terms of availability. And that is how a lot of people put money into reconfiguring their energy systems, even their auto rickshaws, their taxis, whatever, getting into gas. And all of a sudden, these guys are finding that they will now have to either innovate and find a new fuel. One battery guy I was talking to was saying that they may have to either fully electrify, which will call for 1.5 crore of investment, which is a lot for a small firm already dealing with a downturn, or they will have to go to hydrogen, which is a brand new investment. I was talking to one head of a city gas distribution firm yesterday evening, and he said what will happen in most cases is people will go back to the previous fuel they were using, which will be diesel or whatever else. The catch is, this also means that the demand for fuel oil, furnace oil, diesel, kerosene will go up. And so the economics of each of these firms is going to take a beating. At which point, the promoters will face the same question they faced during demonetization, which is that, do I continue running this business and paying my staff salaries despite losses, in which case I eat into my working capital, or do I shut this down for some time? If I shut it down, then the scenario that Shashwat is talking about of migration back home plays out, right? And if the first impact is on the people directly using LPG, the second order, third order effects will be, like Shashwat is saying, what happens to all the growers of vegetables, the vendors of milk, those supply chains also start getting affected. So the ripple effects is, I think, what we're really sort of thinking about right now.
Right. And all of these changes will take time. I mean, alternative fuels, to find it and to set up infrastructure for it will take time. I just wanted to also still focus on the immediate effects. There is a parallel market that is now emerging, and that tends to happen, when there is a shortage of this level. We are seeing LPG cylinders being sold at, much higher prices, as high as say 3,000 rupees here in Mumbai. And I think Shashwata found a cylinder for 4,500 in Kolkata. It's clearly not sustainable. So, what are you guys hearing in terms of how widespread this parallel market is becoming?
So one of the most quick responding parts of our economy is the informal economy. It usually works on wafer thin margins. It's always looking for places for arbitrage and opportunity. I've sort of seen it respond way faster than the organized sector in nearly every single time, whenever there is any unmet demand in the market. And so if there is a shortage, you will see a lot of informal economy solutions coming in. It could be cheap imports of induction stoves from China. It could be the logging mafia getting into this. It could be people black marketing cylinders. Think of what happened in COVID during with oxygen cylinders, right? A market came up. You will have something like that happening here too. You may have cylinders being sold which are not fully filled, right? A lot of, I think, jury-rigged solutions will come into play if we are not able to manage the situation quickly enough to reassure people that there is no reason for stockpiling at home. And that's a hard thing to do because 88% of all crude oil is imported, 60% of LNG is imported, and about 25% of our LPG was flowing through the Gulf Strait of Hormuz. So there is a problem.
Shashwat, I wanted to ask you if you can elaborate a bit more on the migration that you spoke about. Is that already happening? Are you seeing, employers cutting down on staff because they cannot operate and they've had to shut down? What are even migrant workers? If you have spoken to them, what are they saying?
From what I have seen, there has not been reductions in workforce, but there have been production cuts. So, if and which has of course impacted sales of any shop. So, if they cannot earn the revenue that they do on a daily basis, then gradually the work will be cut. The workers will be cut. So one of the shops that I spoke to, also one thing that we need to understand is that every day that this crisis, the war keeps going on, the situation is changing. Like 2 days before, when I spoke to the sweet shop people, two be two of them said that the cylinder had not arrived in the morning, and they had enough stock to just last for one more day. So they literally cut production by half. So their revenues would also be less than half of what they get daily. And a lot of the workers that they hire, they are on contractual basis. So in a sense, they get paid daily or weekly. So this would really impact them. The first to go will be the contractual workers, and then the handful of permanent workers, they'll be leaving, say, in a week's more time. So and everybody I spoke to, they said you come back a week to 10 days later, then you'll understand what the real impact is. So even in the industrial cluster in Howrah, so I had gone to the Jalan Industrial Complex. There, all the businesses that I spoke to, around 10 to 12, all of them said that they are cautious about how the situation is unfolding. As of now, they are not being impacted. But if the crisis extends, then they will have to shut shop, and then you will see a literal mass exodus. So the gas dealer at the industrial complex, he was out of gas stock for the past 4 days, and he supplies around 20 companies in that area. So the companies for now have stocked up, but if their supplier does not have stock, they don't have anything more to fall back on. So the effects will play out. And in terms of parallel economy, one thing that Shekhar said, that people will fall back on the earlier fuel that they use. This is already sort of playing out, because a lot of the eateries that I spoke to, they earlier used to have diesel bhattis. So the people who still kept them, they are now sort of using that so that they can save gas. But the ones that they do not have those bhattis anymore, or they transition from coal, they are going to be in a fix, because coal is polluting, and kerosene, if anybody uses, that is a bit dangerous. So they don't really know what to do. And the smaller shops, they are thinking of, like, the really small shops, like tea shops, or who sell snacks and all. They are thinking of shifting to inductions. And in fact, the induction prices sold in the local markets have shot up to nearly 500 rupees over MRP. So there is already panic buying happening in inductions.
So Shashwata, you spoke about the induction alternative that people are going for. Of course, right now, as you said, it is either unavailable, or it is being sold at a much higher price. And but even for larger businesses, moving to this is proving to be a bit difficult. For example, in Mumbai, there is a Maharashtrian eatery chain called Ladu Samrat, and the owners said that they ran out of cylinders and they could not move to induction quickly enough because their enterprise was too large. So in such a situation, how do businesses and households realistically cope? If these methods are either not available, or they don't have the time. I mean, reverting to the older fuel that they use is obviously not a sustainable option. What can they do to cope better with such shortages?
Well, if you take households, you don't really have a choice. I mean, if you're in a city, there's no LPG, you have to electrify. There's nothing else. But that is going to add to the strain on the grid as well. when this sudden demand comes in, right? All the energy being consumed through LPG suddenly electrifies, and that comes with its own cost effects. Um, Rural areas, I think you will see people going straight back to firewood because power supply itself is erratic, right? So that is where you go.
But then again, it's not a very sustainable solution. So, have you come across something that, is a better alternative? I know moving to electric is a good way to go. But when there's a lack of awareness, how do you build on that?
It's too early. Yeah. I really don't know because if let's say firewood is not available, gas is not available, and induction stoves are not an option, but people still have to eat, right? You will see some amount of community kitchens being set up and so on in that case, at least in the south, where the state governments are a little more functional as of now. That's what they did during COVID. So you're talking about social unrest and some amount of government roles in making food available to people and things like that. But that's like a scenario for now. These are very, very much uncharted waters. I mean, you don't suddenly sort of, knock off a percentage of your energy supply. We've never seen this before. I mean, in the US, you had an energy shock, and the kind of vehicles people were buying changed overnight from the muscle cars to the Japanese imports. How it will play out in India will be partly like that and partly about how people responded during past famines, right? When you don't have food. And remember also that the corollary to all this is that purchasing power will also simultaneously go down if jobs are being lost. So the eatery talking right now कि मेरे पास cylinder नहीं है. Over time, it will also find that the customers coming in is also dropping. So then, if fuel is getting costlier and your income is down, how do you balance it? At some point, this can become a social problem if solutions aren't found quickly enough. If it's a 2-month hiccup, people will manage. Longer than that, uncharted waters.
Right. Archana, I wanted to bring you in at this point and, just widen the lens a little bit and look at the ripple effects, across the country. Beyond just restaurants and households, the shock seems to be spreading to other sectors as well. We're hearing of urea shortages affecting fertilizer availability. Airlines like Air India have started adding fuel surcharges to ticket prices. How quickly do shocks, like this start spilling into other parts of the economy? And what can we expect, in the days to come if the war persists?
So it's a very interesting place that where we're standing, and I like the frame that we've naturally kind of gone to, right? Shekhar comparing what's happening with the demonetization shock, because that is when we first saw the informal economy, actually the entire economy being hit this hard and so suddenly. So the suddenness of that, and what we saw in COVID, which is a long drawn kind of shock that the economy had to absorb, and again, in both the cases, it was ultimately the informal sector that took the worst hit. And so we seem to be in another shock that is going to be long drawn from the look of it. We've just today had the Prime Minister's talk about how, our headlines are full of him saying that we'll come out of it just like we came out of the COVID shock. So there is a natural comparison to both these. But it really will, it's unfortunate that we seem to be becoming an economy that is absorbing shocks instead of being able to even get the breather to build a bulwark against such shocks. So we will need to see, for instance, like Shekhar and Paridhi as well as Shashwata were talking about, the layers of the shock. So the first order, the second order. So the macroeconomic squeeze has already begun. One of the first threats that will happen is the rate at which we were to be growing. We are still the largest, fastest growing major economy, or so it would seem. But if this continues, then that window of our growth, which was required for us to kind of sustain over the next 10 years, to be able to back a demography which is really young, that window completely, is threatened. And so there's already numbers of, say, instead of 7%, that growth forecasts are being downgraded. So that is something that we're going to have to keep lookout for what happens. If oil stays, for instance, at above 90 or $95 for the next 3 or 4 quarters, then we are going to see our growth shrinking. That's going to be the immediate aftermath. But the bigger thing to worry about is what each one of y'all is seeing on the ground, which is the job losses. And the job losses are in the informal sector to begin with. You're going to see those people being hit at a very different level. I mean, induction cookers prices going up is one thing. We're not seeing them available, say, on online sites. Even if you want to go electric, we're not in a place where we can quickly go electric, even for cooking. So businesses also are going to find it difficult. The costs, for instance, if it's going to cost like 2.5 crore, what Shekhar was saying, for an industry to move, that's not something that smaller businesses are going to be able to handle easily. And so that is going to mean that where do they cut costs? They cut costs in jobs. And that is something that we really need to look out for. We already run a food program where we are, giving food, free food to millions of people. If joblessness continues, then there will have to be pressure on the government also to be able to make provisions to ensure that not only does this food program happen, but that there are other supports that they will have to give out to families, and that is going to be an added cost also. I mean, this is just off the top of my head that I'm talking about the disruptions that we're seeing in the short run, in the next 2 quarters, because the impact of this disruption is going to be seen over multiple quarters. Even if the war stops tomorrow, which unlikely it will, we're going to see the next 4 quarters at least impacted in some way or the other. So I'll stop there for now.
Right. No, and Archana, I wanted to just add to that further and take it a step further, because, how do you then place this situation, when it comes to the larger geopolitical picture, where, we are dealing with these shocks, but then, you have Trump announcing, Indian companies like Reliance being linked to these oil infrastructure projects in Texas. What does this tell us about India's position in the global energy system right now? Are we trying to hedge our bets between fossil fuels and the transition?
Yeah, I think all of us are watching this play out, and it's very interesting to see the Reliance announcement, for instance. So it's what is it telling us? It's basically telling us about how India's private sector, and by extension the country itself, is positioning itself in a world order which is fragmenting and really fast. So on the surface, it would look like everybody's doubling down on fossil fuel, you know, basically all the climate imperatives that we were talking about, they are out of the way for now. But there is a much bigger and broader shift that is happening. So the first is, I think, what we will see, and I'm assuming that that will happen even for the West, especially for the West, is this diversifying away from the West. Because I think the shutting down of the Strait of Hormuz and the attacks on all the allies, US allies, as well as the disruptions that have been caused there in the Middle East, which is the main oil supplying zone for the world. You're going to see everybody talk about basically not relying on energy imports for their economies because of the high vulnerability. So you're going to see some part of that, and US is doing that, and India being part of it is an interesting development which we'll need to see. But what we are also seeing is India is playing both sides of this energy transition. So the official framing even last year was, energy independence by 2047, net zero by 2070. So those two goals are right there. But at the same time, there is this managing of, tensions with whether it's our partner like US, or whether it is how we're building our, partnerships with EU, with Canada, the middle powers basically coming together. And it's also interesting because it's coming in a year when India is the BRICS, holding the BRICS presidency. So it's going to be interesting to watch how we navigate our plans to continue to remain, strategically autonomous, and at the same time manage all these various tensions in the external world. So the good part for now, in the long run, it will probably mean that we will have to look at Atmanirbharta in a real sense, and we'll have to see how we choose away from fossil fuels. Or, but that is a long term thing. For the short term, I think the predicament is much deeper, much more real in terms of uh, and much more. Uh, Difficult to navigate for a country like India. Although so far we seem to have, managed our equations really well with partners. But how it affects our markets, how it affects our growth will determine also how our partners treat us or deal with us. So those are the hoops that we will have to jump through in the coming months.
Right. Yeah, the uncertainty is definitely something that is keeping everyone on their toes. But I also, for my final question, just want to zoom out and look at the bigger picture here. We've all seen stark images of death and destruction, the black rain falling on Tehran. So this has clearly now become an environmental crisis as well. And we are in the world is attempting an energy transition at the moment, with China leading the way. Conflicts like this, will they end up slowing this global energy transition, or if this is a moment for the world to accelerate the move away from oil?
I'm seeing it in two ways. One is, of course, two ways in terms of the costs of doing this or not doing this. One is, it's very evident that the older system, which is based on fossil fuels, is not just fragmenting in itself, like the US-led world order, the world order that was put in place post the Second World War, is in itself fragmenting. You know that one of the reasons why a lot of uncertainty in the oil sector in the last 10 years has also been because we know that the days of oil is limited. It doesn't matter which way you look at it. The very reason why an economy like Saudi was moving towards, bringing in tourism, opening up its economic sectors was because they are preparing for a world beyond oil. It may happen in the next 50 years, may happen over the next 70 years, but it is happening. And so it is inevitable. The transition doesn't stop. The thing is, what is going to be the cost and at what place are we going to be? For instance, within India, if this war prolongs, like what Shekhar, Shashwata, Paridi were talking about, if we start using, say, wood more, because we don't have a choice in the short run. What does that do for our cities? What does that do for our health? What does that do? How do the costs, the escalating costs down that line, if those actions happen, how do these costs escalate? What is the price that we have to pay for natural gas? We're buying oil from Russia at a premium. So the price that you're going to have to pay in the short run. So the short run, the costs are really stacking up. And that may actually end up slowing our transition, even if we want to transit. And we want to transition. That's very clear. We are not moving away from that. But the costs are going to rise. And managing that is going to have to become a bigger priority for India in the short run than, how fast. So basically, all our timelines have already gone for a toss from whatever's happened so far.
Yeah.
So two things there, right? I mean, one, if you look at this situation linearly, countries like India are in deep trouble because your energy bill is going to go up dramatically. There are forecasts I'm reading about 160 a barrel and so on. So if you are simultaneously putting in so much money into your crude oil basket, and you're simultaneously running food programs to sort of keep people fed, it doesn't leave you with a lot of money for, forget developmental expenditure, but even for decarbonization. I think this is a scenario that a bunch of countries will see. But now here, people, companies, countries, everybody is always looking for an opportunity. And now imagine in this landscape, if some country, let's say China, comes out with a solution saying that, we understand you want to decarbonize and we understand you don't have the money for this. So we are going to work out a financing system in which you don't pay us upfront. You pay us overtime. That would so incredibly accelerate decarbonization across the world, because in the same way that right now, I think companies in India are going to be extremely disillusioned with LNG. After this, I think the message of energy independence goes down even clearer across the world. You don't want to be so you don't want to be at the mercy of a few countries, or of two people, as in this case, right? So I think the business case for decarbonization has been established. The technology we know is in place. The only thing which was slowing decarbonization was actually captured by lobbies. There was no reason why India wasn't pivoting harder and faster to decarbonization, if not for entrenched opposition from firms in coal mining, thermal power, and so on. Now, I think you will see, out of self-interest, faster decarbonization. The question is about the kind of market instruments that get created to facilitate this for countries. This is what we were hearing about Reliance a long time back, that they would replay the telecom model where they would give you the handset free and collect their money over monthly payments. You're kind of talking about something like that now, where a country, let's say China, says that, we will help you decarbonize, we'll set up the solar arrays for you, we'll take this money over time. So it's a pivotal moment for sure.
Yes, and hopefully it is a moment that will push us to a better world. And on that hopeful note, I want to just thank everyone for joining us, and I hope this conversation has helped unpack some of the immediate and longer term consequences of this war. You can read our big story on this crisis on carboncopy.info. We will be tracking this situation in the weeks to come, so please stay tuned, and thanks for listening.